Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dave Laban, and I'm the President and CEO of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. APA is a national nonprofit organization located in Washington, D.C., serving prosecutors as well as their law enforcement and community partners to make safer, just, and more equitable communities. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Today's webinar is on developing and managing working groups for the successful implementation of prosecutorial performance indicators, or as we refer to them as PPIs. PPIs are an effective tool to increase prosecutorial transparency and efficiency. The focus of today's webinar is specifically on the strategies that sites can use to conceptualize, develop, and maintain working groups during the PPI implementation. This webinar is the 7th in our PPI series, and it's made possible by the support of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Safety and Justice Challenge. We are fortunate to be joined today by three wonderful speakers. First, the Honorable Monique Worrell of the 9th Circuit of Florida, more commonly referred to as Orlando, or at least Orlando is one of our counties, which I'll refer to with Disney World being the second happiest place on earth, because Disneyland is the first. So, but we're very pleased to have Monique with us. She is joined by Catherine Marlowe, who has been a prosecutor in the office for 21 years. And when you look at this, in leading the office and in leading change, the state's attorneys like Monique need great people behind them, as well as the importance of the planning as much as the plan itself. So, talking about Catherine a bit, she's spent more than 17 years as an ASA in the 9th Judicial Circuit State Attorney's Office, where she's worked under 4 different administrations. Catherine has worked in misdemeanors, felony, intake, domestic violence, sex crimes, and homicide bureaus. Currently, Catherine is the division chief in the General Felony Bureau, supervising 2 circuit court divisions. And we are also joined by Dr. Rebecca Dunley of Florida International University. Dr. Dunley specializes in data research on courtroom decision-making with an emphasis on prosecutorial discretion and socio-demographic disparities in criminal case processing. Her research at the FIU Center for the Administration of Justice focuses on data-informed prosecution and helping prosecutors' offices around the country become more effective and fair through the improvement of data and analytical capacity. On behalf of APA, thank you for being here, and thank you to you in the audience for attending and for your participation. Before I turn it over to our presenters, just a few housekeeping items. Our presenters encourage attendees to ask questions throughout the course of the presentation. You will be able to submit questions for our speakers using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you need additional or technical assistance, please utilize the chat function so we can address those issues separately. Feel free also to join in on the chat function, say hello, and tell us where you are watching from. To move into the substance of our webinar, thank you again to our speakers for presenting on this important topic. Rebecca, I believe you were going to start us off with an overview on how PPIs work and why a working group is so important. I pass it to you.
Yes, thank you, Dave. I'm delighted to be here. Hi, again, my name is Rebecca Dunley. I am one of the co-managers of the Prosecutorial Performance Indicators, or the PPI project. And the goal of the project is to help make prosecution more data informed by helping offices create data and data dashboards to improve effectiveness, efficiency, fairness, and transparency in prosecution. So data projects of this size often have many moving parts to them. And it is extremely useful when doing the PPIs or any other large data project, really, to have a dedicated group who kind of facilitates the movement forward of the project and make sure the original objectives and goals of the project are met. So the PPI team is absolutely delighted to have partnered, I think over a year ago now, with the 9th Circuit of Florida, with Monique in her office, to create a data dashboard and improve capacity. So we're delighted to be partners. And I think, Monique, I will turn it over to you to kind of talk about why you decided to join the PPI project and where we stand on it.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It really is a pleasure to be working with you and the FIU team. I ran on a campaign that talked a lot about data. And when we discussed data, we discussed it with regards to the data in the state of Florida on a whole regarding incarceration, regarding recidivism, and things of that nature. It was very important to me when I took office that we had an office that was very data conscious and that I collected data internally as to what we were actually doing in the office and how the data from the Ninth Circuit fit within the data puzzle for the entire state. So I was excited to partner with FIU on this project so that we could create working groups to begin working to collect this data so that over a period of time, we'll be able to look back and see what we're doing. We can measure it by some way and see what changes need to be made to produce the outcomes that we are trying to receive.
So I'm actually curious, Monique, if you could talk about what the initial experience has been, I suppose, working with us, the PPI team. So what has the experience been like thus far? Our project has been going on for a full year. We do not have a data dashboard up. So is your sense that, or I should say, have there been any challenges that have come up so far in the project that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. The major challenge that we encountered as we were developing this was our lack of a data analyst. It was great that we had the desire and that we wanted to collect this data, but there was really no one in the office who was adequately equipped to assist us in collecting and analyzing the data. So I'll say that the experience working with the team so far has been great. You all have come in and helped us to identify what we need and worked with our working group to explain what it is that we're trying to accomplish, but also to help put the minds at ease of people who are a little bit skeptical about data and how that could reflect on them personally as individuals. And you've been able to come in and work with, you know, ASAs like Catherine Marlowe, who have been here for 20 years and make them ambassadors of the usefulness of data and how data can be shaped, or how we can use data to shape our policy and our interactions. You have also been kind enough to sit in on some of the interviews that we've had with trying to hire a data analyst. That actually has been probably our biggest struggle. But I am pleased to say that we have a data analyst that is starting here in the very immediate future. And I think that that's going to take us a far ways to finally being able to collect the information that we need to get our data dashboard up.
Thank you, Monique. I think that actually segues pretty well into the first slide, if we can move forward one. Awesome. So the first question, I think if we're talking about the value or creating a working group for a large data project, is why do you need to have it? The PPI team is very sensitive to the fact that prosecutors' offices across the country are dealing with very large caseloads, a lot of backlogs due to the pandemic and court closures and whatnot. So there is a lot of pressure to do many different things right now in these offices. So it is worth talking about, well, why do we need to have another dedicated committee or another dedicated group to do this other thing? Is there any way that we can successfully do a large data project without taking up more and more of our personal time? And the short answer is that it is very important to continue having these dedicated groups and having a dedicated PPI working group, in large part because it helps create a particular job for somebody to do with regard to the PPI project. So when you have any kind of large initiative like that, in short, if it's not somebody's job to get the thing done, it most likely will not get done. And in our experience working on these large projects, it does need to be the specific responsibility of either one or a couple of people within an office to make sure that the project keeps moving. If there's too much diffusion of responsibility, if there are too many people that are responsible for doing very small pieces of a project, then the coordination becomes more and more difficult, and you're likely to lose more and more pieces of the project as you move forward. So the overarching, point to make is that a working group will help make sure that a project of this scale continues on the direction that you want it to move in. But I also think that there are other benefits to different individuals within an office or different groups within a PPI project. So the way we've kind of thought about this is there could be benefits to the office as a whole, there can be benefits to individual attorneys, and there's also benefits to the researcher or data analyst who is working specifically on the PPI project. So first, I wondered, Monique, could you talk a little bit about what you see or have seen the benefits of having a working group office or in your office be?
Sure. So prior to my administration, I think there was very little interest in using data within the office. And as I mentioned, when we discussed that we were going to start looking at data, there was some concern. I think that creating the working group was beneficial in alleviating some of that concern and getting individuals who understood the importance of the use of data, like Ms. Marlowe, to, again, serve as data ambassadors. Another thing is that the working group kind of served as an incubator for data culture, so that for people who didn't have any previous information with regards to the usefulness of data, they could now begin to learn and understand why it was important or it was useful. And the group members were able to informally kind of spread the word so that we could quell the fear of data that was initially, I think, present. It also is the potential for us to identify young prosecutors with good strategic managers mindset, so that we can see who those individuals are who are doing things that are, working and useful. So those are some benefits that we've seen so far, but again, we are very early in the process.
Rebecca, do you mind if I ask Monique kind of the size of the office? As you talk about coming in the administration, and I believe, don't you have 2 different counties within your jurisdiction?
Correct.
So how does that? Yeah. So when you talk about the data and being data informed, how does that work? So on the larger scale.
So we do have 2 separate counties. It's Orange and Osceola County. And the office is about 380 employees, 170 lawyers. 170 of that 380 are lawyers. So basically, we are going to have to streamline the data that's collected between the 2 counties so that we can see, and this is of particular importance to me, to ensure that there is consistency in our handling of cases between the 2 counties.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that one of the perks for an office is that a PPI working group can help you identify good future managers. So that's a great segue. Catherine, I wonder, could you talk about, since you have been a part of the working group in this jurisdiction for some time now, kind of what you see as the benefits of being a part of a working group like this are, and why you agreed to participate in it in the first place?
So I'm, like most lawyers, I'm very logical. And I personally like the idea of data. When we were first introduced to it, when Monique first told the office, okay, we're going to be a part of this project, and we were able to actually see the website and see what would be involved, it interested me. I also I just wanted to learn more about it. And it seemed like the best way to do that would be to volunteer to be a part of it. As Monique said, it also gives me the opportunity to talk to other people who might have been skeptics about our office participating in this project and what it might mean. I like the idea of being involved in the strategic planning, but for me, and I mean, I've been with this particular office for more than 17 years, I feel like this dashboard is going to be a reflection of our work. And I want it to be an accurate reflection of our work. And I can't feel like I'm ensuring that that happens unless I'm a part of the project. So to me, I feel personally invested in this office and the work that we do. And I want to make sure that we have an accurate representation of that in our dashboard.
Makes a lot of sense. What has your experience been like so far on the working group? So I know, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes also, where we are in the process. But we put in almost a year's worth of, discussions, conversations as a working group. So, have you seen any benefits from it yet?
Yeah, I think it's generated some good conversations among the prosecutors that are involved. I think we have anywhere from I think it's 5 to 7 on our working group that are prosecutors. We meet every other week for an hour. Obviously, we took some time off over the holidays, but other than that, but honestly, it's been interesting. And we got very lucky in that the people that seem to volunteer for this and stick with it have all been they're not the skeptics, they're not the naysayers, they're the people that really want to be a part of it. They're interested in it, they like the data. Honestly, it's been, I think, very easy for us. I mean, you all are incredibly organized. I would assume part of that's the research background, but so it feels like each meeting, we have an objective and we're going to very logically go through even going through the PPIs themselves. Okay, so there's 55, let's go one at a time. And we just went through it and everybody gave their input on things. And it's been very, very easy, I think, for us. In
your 17 years in the office, or can you think of other times when you've had these types of discussions, like kind of thinking about higher level trends? Or is this kind of a new thing, a new way of thinking about things for the working group?
It really is a new way of thinking about it. I mean, obviously the data that you're pulling is from our case management system. And before, we had the ability to we call it run reports. We can run certain reports to know, but generally speaking, in the past, the only thing they wanted to look at was, well, how many cases went to trial? So there was no okay, let's not worry about the trial statistics. Let's look at other things, other indicators. Before, there was just a lot of focus on trials and whether you got the conviction, things like that. And it's nice to look at other things because the conviction doesn't always show the whole picture.
Right. And it's also not the only thing that you do. It's not the only reflection of success in your work. Like there are so many other pieces to the job and things that you're accomplishing day to day that just aren't captured in that one metric or 2 metrics. And I will say, I feel like I've been a part of the working group as it's progressed for the past year also. So I have been at these meetings, and as the researcher involved in this project, whether you are internal to the office as a data analyst or you are an external researcher like I am in this case, it's extremely useful to kind of generate these discussions and to talk about what just the policies and practices in the office are. And I think even if the data analyst working on the PPI project is internal, so they're familiar with many of the office's systems and practices and whatnot, there's still always more to be learned. And so these meetings have been extremely useful for our FIU PPI team over the past year because we've gotten so much more knowledge about just how things work, essentially. And you don't know what you don't know. So, you all will, it's been a great working group, and that there's a lot of critical thinking, and there's a lot of, oh, well, I wonder if we could measure that, or I wonder if this new policy is affecting, or will be affecting that data trend once we see the data. And it really helps us get a better sense of what we need to be measuring with the data and how we need to structure it and how we need to present it to make it fit the office context. So that's one of the benefits for the data analyst, is it's an opportunity to learn more. And I will also say that if the PPI data analyst is internal to the office, at least in our experience, we've seen that there is often a bit of a data silo or an IT silo, in that people who are working with the data, people who are doing these unique projects, are not always regularly communicating with or interacting with attorneys in the office. So we, as the FIU team, appreciate the opportunity to build relationships with you while we're in these meetings, but they can also be beneficial even if the analyst is already internal. So it's a great way to build, these working groups are a great way to build relationships in general, whether it's internally or externally as well. The one other thing I will note here from the researcher's perspective is that it is a fantastic thing to have a built-in mechanism for accountability when you're working on a project that takes so long to complete. Having a bi-weekly meeting, which is what we, when we're moving forward, we have in this office, is a great way to hold our team accountable and make sure that we are ready and have things to present and talk about at every meeting. And if a meeting doesn't go particularly well, it's because we haven't prepared the right data or the right conversation points yet. So having to report back regularly to you all, Catherine, has been a great help to us in keeping us on track and keeping things moving, even through what has been, ups and downs in terms of availability and whatnot. So that's a very useful component to this as well. I think we can move to the next slide. All right, so a couple of logistical things to consider here. As you are forming a working group, it's important to think about who the best people, will say, to be on it would be. And so our recommendation is that you're putting together this working group. You want to include whoever is sort of your main coordinator for the project. The person who stays aware of every component of it and stays on top of every component of it. If you do have an internal data analyst, then they should be a part of the working group. If you are partnered with an external and hopefully local researcher, then it's also extremely useful to that researcher, again, to be a part of the working group. But you also want to make sure that you are including a good range of voices. And one of the ways to ensure that you get that range is to include both more senior experienced attorneys and several junior attorneys who, if you are the state attorney or an executive team member who's trying to pick the people for this working group or invite people to participate, and thinking about those people who have shown some interest in the data, or maybe it's a volunteer system and it's those who excitedly volunteer, or just those that you think will be able to make a good contribution to this type of project. That said, in Orange Osceola, it's a very positive and productive group. I think everybody in the group is very interested in moving things forward. I think we didn't have to do much convincing about the value of measuring data and measuring and creating trend lines and examining them over time, right? Like our meetings have not been spent saying, it's good for you to look at these trend lines. You kind of came to the table with an interest in that and an understanding of the value of that in the first place. It can be good. Our recommendation for offices who are considering forming working groups and doing a PPI project from this point forward is to include, a range of voices, so that your working group ends up becoming like a microcosm of the office, but just slightly more data inclined. So there's I highly doubt there's a perfect office out there where every single attorney is interested in understanding of the value of data. So there will be skeptics, people who either don't believe that it's useful or don't see how it makes sense to do a project like this in their office. So including some voices who are not just going to, attempt to shut down the project, but will kind of offer healthy and critical, critiques of the work and of the data are very helpful as you're particularly in the early stages of a PPI working group, because they give you a sense of what some of the objections of the wider office will be once you get ready to launch a dashboard. And they help you identify sort of the problems or the weaknesses in your process early on so that you can, sort through them and be prepared to address them when they come up. So we call it a healthy range of voices. You can use whatever term you want, but make sure you have a productive but generally data interested group. We recommend 7 to 8 people as a target size. And then if there's a particular topic for a meeting where another voice or two would be helpful, then you can, of course, bring in additional people who have particular expertise in that area. That said, we also in Orange Osceola, we have bi-weekly meetings, and regular meetings like that, again, serve many purposes, but every other week to maybe once a month at the start of the project is a good way to go about it. Any project like this will have ebbs and flows. So there may be months where you have no meetings, and there may be months where you need to have a meeting a week or even sometimes 2 meetings a week. But generally speaking, it's good to get people sort of in the habit of attending a meeting every other week or so. That's about, Catherine, would you say that's been an appropriate amount for the project thus far, given the ebbs and flows again?
Yeah, it really has been.
Okay.
It's too far apart that you forget everything that you talked about last time, but it's not every week, so it's not as burdensome.
Yeah. Monique, could you talk about when we initially proposed to you the idea of creating a PPI working group, so kind of handing this project to them to get going and get legs, how did you envision the working group come together? What kind of people did you want to be a part of the working group? Or was there a particular process for selecting individuals to invite?
So I wanted people who were open-minded, and I wanted to bring together those who are on the front line to assist in managing how the office functions and utilizes data to enhance our services to the community. We wanted everyone from senior ASAs to new ASAs to be a part of the process, to have different perspectives and insights. And our management team, because I was brand new to the office at the time that we did this, the existing managers helped us in identifying which ASAs would be good to participate.
And then Cap, to you initially.
You went out for a second there. What was the question?
I said, how was the project and the working group pitched to you initially? So what was that communication like that convinced you to participate?
Honestly, for me, my interest was piqued immediately. As soon as Monique explained to the entire office, we're going to do this project, I would like, attorneys to participate. My interest was piqued. And then one of the other executive team members put together a time when you all were here in person, and she just essentially just kind of walked around the office and said, I want people that are interested in this. And initially the group that came to that meeting was a little larger than we have now. And I think that's just because either those people were pretending to be interested, or they just didn't have enough time and thought they might. But I mean, it was really just, we want people who are interested in being a part of this, and people who are willing to commit to being a part of this.
And just for my own understanding, what were the impressions of the sense you had about the time commitment? Like, was that communicated by the PPI team, by the office, well or appropriately, given that you've been doing it for a year now?
I don't remember if we were told in the beginning that we were told it wouldn't be, onerous or anything like that, but I don't think we were told specifically 1 hour every other week. I don't think we were giving that level of specificity, but once the meetings were set up and they were on the calendar, it was pretty easy. I mean, it was like, okay, it's Thursday at 11. Like, we know when it is.
Okay, you want to move to the next slide? All right. Okay, so the third question that the PPI team gets all the time about a working group is, well, what are the different stages of this group? Like, am I going to be doing the same thing for a set amount of time, or will my sort of responsibility or involvement shift over time? So this slide in a way kind of represents the way we see the progression of a working group's responsibilities and involvement in a project working. One of the more important phases and the first one in a PPI project for the working group is the strategic planning period. And this is that time when you first get a working group together and you talk about, well, what do we want this project to look like? And very importantly, do we have a target timeline, especially for releasing an external and or internal dashboard? And who are the people that we need to be involved in order to make that happen? So who's physically going to build it? Who is going to be the one who's extracting data or putting it on a website? Other elements of strategic planning to consider would be things like, well, do we need to do anything before we start working with the data from our case management system? So would something like an office-wide survey or doing, some one-on-one interviews with line attorneys help us understand what the purpose of this dashboard is going to be, what kinds of data we want to include on it, and give additional chances to give feedback about the project while it's very much in its infancy. This is also a great time for a working group to kind of develop a strategy for internal communications. Monique, I think you mentioned that one of the values of a working group can be that you've basically identified data ambassadors, people who can communicate how the project is progressing, what the purposes are, kind of, lift up the value of the data and the point of the project. So this is a good group to kind of facilitate that internal communication. And it's a good idea to think intentionally about how you want to do it. So I guess I have a question for you, Catherine. What was your impression of the first working group meeting? So there's that initial period when the group's trying to consolidate and get into a rhythm. So do you have any advice for people who are working on putting together a working group?
So first of all, like I said before, it really helps when you all are well organized, then people don't feel like they're wasting their time by sitting around while there's not like an agenda or anything like that. It's nice to have that. You all are lovely, engaging people, so we never had an issue. There weren't like personality conflicts or anything weird. I mean, I think it's just helpful to have people that are interested in being problem solvers. That's not just going to be naysayers all the time, that, there's going to be useful discussions. It's not going to devolve into something unhelpful. And just, again, like if people are interested in this as a concept, then I think that helps.
Monique, what was communicated back to you during those, initial meetings? Were any like needs emphasized?
I think most of the feedback that I got was regards to the limits of our data capabilities internally. And that was a huge issue. And then going back to the fact that we needed someone whose responsibility it was to steward this information and help us so that we could produce the information that was necessary to provide the data. So those were the biggest, areas of feedback.
Catherine, what so far in the project for you have there been opportunities to communicate with people who are not in the working group about what the project is? Have people asked you about it, or does it come up in conversation at all?
It might come up because they realize, oh, you were at a meeting, and well, we were in the PPI meetings. I will say, if you're not in the working group, this kind of goes on the back burner probably for most people. I think the interest will pick up once they hear, oh, they're starting to get the data, because I don't think it's as entertaining if it's just a concept, unless you, like I said, happen to be interested. I think at the point where we're going to say, okay, so here's the data for our office, I think people will, that will pique their interest.
Could you hit forward one slide? It's gonna look very similar. Okay. So the second phase of a working group's involvement, we think of as the development of the PPI, so the development of the PPI plan. This is the phase, and we've just finished this phase in this particular jurisdiction where we reviewed all 55 PPIs, and it generated a lot of interesting discussions, like conceptually, right? Because we don't yet have too much data to put, behind these PPIs, but it's a very important part of the process to think about, okay, well, what kinds of data do we want to measure, and what do we want to prioritize? And what PPIs are kind of like touching on issues that are relevant for our office, but we need to make adjustments to them. Because before you start collecting data, if you kind of had these discussions and thought about, well, how do we want to collect the information that we're going to put on a dashboard? It helps you pull the right or better information, better data the first time around, so that you're not, doing a giant extraction, cleaning out, coding the data, creating an indicator, and then we bring it to you, Catherine, and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You need to do that completely differently. And it kind of feels like we're back to square one. So these conversations, though hypothetical, kind of give the research data analyst a much stronger sense of like what is important to you. And it also is where, you have gotten a chance to give a lot of very valuable feedback about ways to adjust the indicators and make them more specific to your jurisdiction. And I think it also, in reflecting on our past year together, we came up with a number of different indicators or kind of things that were going on in your office as results of relatively new policies or other things that could essentially be other indicators to measure that aren't really any of the 55 PPIs. So this is where like that working group really starts to get thinking critically about, available data and how to represent the office with it. And as I mentioned, this is about where we are right now in this project, right? We finished that. And the next phase, if you can move it forward one, is the PPI review, which, Catherine, we had our first PPI review meeting just this morning. So I wonder if you want to talk about a little bit about what that was like.
Well, and I don't know what your impression was, but for me, it was like everybody was glued to their screens wanting to see this graph showing and what does that mean? It's really interesting once you start seeing the data up there. And I mean, we only, maybe got, I don't know, between 3 to 5, little areas, but everybody was like, oh, okay, let me look at that. Let me, so I think that's really going to, at that point, people will all of a sudden become very, very interested in your PPI project. I thought like when we were going through and talking about it, that took a long time. That was weeks and weeks of going through the indicators. And one of my takeaways from that was that this will help people improve, because all of our data essentially is going to come out of, most of it anyway, will come out of our internal case management system. But there were times when we were discussing the PPIs and we were realizing that, the case management system wasn't designed to measure these things. It's designed for other purposes. And it was interesting to see areas in which we could improve it, not just to capture better data for you all, but to have better data for us. And one area that stands out to me was when we were talking about, reasons why cases get closed out, and you wanted to track them for a certain PPI. And we were like, oh, we don't really do that. Like, we don't have a code for that in our system. We just have kind of these general codes. And it was nice to see the codes that maybe other jurisdictions use and how we could hopefully eventually change some of the codes in our system to track those things.
That's a great point. And you all were persevered very valiantly over the past year waiting for the data. So just so everybody has the same context, we just had our first kind of presentation of some initial data this morning, and it's incomplete, but the PPI team feels that it's important to, to the extent that we can show data, even if it's still in the early stages, it kind of helps regenerate the initial excitement that there was, right? So it was an enjoyable experience for our team too, to kind of be able to, show you some of the first output from the project. That said, it's quite raw data, right? Catherine, have you previously kind of seen more than just running reports in the office, like what can be produced with case management system data, or was this the first time you'd seen any kind of trend lines or anything like that in your office?
I can't remember ever. I mean, we've had various like community partners say, oh, it would be nice if you all would file X percentage of cases, but I've never seen what percentage of cases we file. So I don't think we usually collect and or present the data on our office that way.
So, well, I guess to officially say, like, the next phase of the working group involvement would be actually reviewing data for the PPIs. And, once you've gotten a chance to talk about as many of them as you feel are important, which could be all 55, it could have been less, then it's time to, once the data have been at least initially extracted and coded out, to start interpreting initial trend lines that you see. And this is always a process. I guess we're just starting out this process with the working group here, but there will be several iterations of data extraction and interpretation and kind of having back and forth conversations about, does this make sense? Like, does this reflect what your perceptions were prior to joining this working group of what was happening in the office? Because sometimes the data needs to be adjusted, or a trend line needs to be kind of altered in its measurement to make it better fit, Catherine, the way that you see things happening on the ground. And other times a single trend line can spark 10 different questions and 10 new ways to slice and dice the data that will help kind of inform what that one trend line is saying. So the PPI review is arguably one of the more fun parts of this, because you put in all this background work and discussion, and you finally get to see kind of what the data in your office looks like. If we can move to the next slide. So the fourth phase of a PPI working group would be, once you've created indicators, once you're kind of getting ready to launch a dashboard, the working group really becomes a strategically important group for how exactly you're going to present information to the public, or to your internal staff, or whoever it is that any one dashboard is going to be targeting as an audience. So a big part of any data dashboard, in our opinion, should be data stories, or context given to a single line or a couple of lines that you see on a chart. So Monique, I know you've spoken about this recently. I wonder if you could talk about the importance of kind of giving context to the data, and whether you see data stories written by people in your office as an important part of a working group's activities, and something to accompany any dashboard that gets published.
So yes, I had the opportunity to see the data stories at the conference that I attended with you all last week, and it definitely, I think, showed the importance of having data stories to provide context for the data, because if you're not someone who is very interested in data and very familiar with how it's utilized, I think it makes it much more difficult to understand it, or even really be concerned or interested in it without the data story. So I am hopeful, or not hopeful, we're going to definitely use data stories when we begin to put out our data. I'm in a position where I can do a little bit more than hope, so. But I know that it's easy for me to say that that's what we're going to do when I'm not going to be the one doing it. One of the things that I learned from the conference last week was the fact that that is very time consuming, and it takes a lot to actually go into making the data story. So I'm hopeful that with the addition of our data analysts to the team, that that's something that we're going to be able to do.
The other piece of that a working group can contribute during a dashboard launch is, again, we're back to internal communications, kind of helping others in the office understand what the dashboard is, what its purpose is, kind of in a summary way, explain what went into the work. Because one issue that can come up with the creation and launch of data dashboards is that people internally weren't really aware or didn't understand what the point was. And they think it's just, oh my gosh, is my performance going to be assessed based on this dashboard? Or is something going to happen to me if there's a bad trend line or if we identify a problem or whatnot? So the working group is in a great position to be able to kind of convey internally, like, no, this is something that the office has had a lot of, we've kind of personally taken responsibility for this. We've reviewed all of the data. This is not going to be an assessment of your personal performance. We're not going to break down the data that way. Like, this is a way for our office to be transparent, to help educate the community about what we're doing and what our priorities are. And help get everybody on board, or at least understanding of what the main point of the dashboard is and what it isn't. So that communication piece can be not a make or break, but it's very important when you're getting ready to do a dashboard launch, that people in the office understand it and therefore don't have to be quite as fearful of it. Can we move forward one more? And then the last, phase of a working group would just be the maintenance phase. So after you've launched a dashboard, whether external or internal, we hope that the working group will continue to meet periodically, though perhaps not quite as frequently, to review updates to the dashboards and maybe think about whether it can be expanded or altered in new ways. So, creating a data dashboard isn't really the be all end all, right? You want the dashboard to be informative and useful, and you want something to change or improve based on it. So to the extent that the working group is able to help kind of facilitate that move from we publish to we're using what we've published, is a great way for the working group to continue to be involved in the project. So those are the phases of the working group from our perspective. I mean, in every office, it can and should go a little differently. But in general, there is plenty for a working group to do. Hopefully, this has kind of given you a sense of what it could be useful for. Could we move to the next slide? So I'm curious, Catherine, Monique, whether you've kind of felt like do you have any more advice to give to people who are just starting a project like this, or things that you've learned along the way in the last year?
Mine would be get your data analysts at the very beginning of the process go much more smoothly, and they're very difficult to find, and they're also very expensive. So.
I think for us, the best thing has been getting people that were enthusiastic about the idea and about the project, and that they're, I mean, you want people to be engaged in the process. You don't want somebody there just because they were ordered to be there. So I think it really necessarily needs to be a volunteer basis.
And the one thing that I'll add, as from the researcher perspective, is that you don't always foresee or remember that there will probably be some initial discomfort with creating data and increasing transparency where it didn't used to exist. And the working group is a great little incubator for kind of working through, I won't use the word defensiveness, but just like discomfort or lack of familiarity with, seeing data that's a reflection of the decisions that you that a line attorney and others in the office have made. So the discomfort tends to subside once the working group has progressed to a point where they can see that their feedback is being acknowledged, and they can trust that the first raw attempts that they see at, data trend lines are not automatically what will be presented to the public. So as a researcher, a data analyst engaging in this kind of work, be sure to communicate regularly that it's a learning process and the data will improve with time, and that the point of the working group is to improve the way the data trend lines are being created, not just to see them and then see them on a public-facing dashboard. So with that, that's all I have. If there were any questions, or Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
That's what I was looking for, is I believe there was one question from, because we had a hand raised, I think it was Lindsay Jackson. But I don't see any typed response. So I guess I was really listening to what you were saying there at the end, as far as what are the learned experiences? What do you say to other offices now that you've been through it a lot, and having Monique with the vision of where she wanted to take things? Lindsay just said it was an error. And listening to, at the staff level, how does that work? But as we were saying that, now a question is coming in, which is, what's your timeline goal for updating the data? The question wasn't annually, which probably you're not going to have annual updates. I think maybe a little bit more speed than that.
I don't have that yet. I mean, we are literally just at the point where we're getting it for the first time, and our dashboard isn't up. So we're still very much in the construction phase. It would be my hope that we'll have a system that will keep the numbers, very close to current. I just don't know how that'll work, so I can't answer that.
Perfect. And I think that was the question for the audience. Maybe over to you, Rebecca, to say, what is that sort of model practice? Is it monthly? If you're pulling it off your system, can you have it weekly, or what numbers do you like to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the target really depends on the pre-existing capacity of the office, right? Like, we'll always advocate for whatever you can do now, maybe aim to make it just a little bit faster, like slightly quicker updates, so that you're kind of in that constant improvement phase. That said, some offices with pretty advanced data capacity are able to extract data on an almost daily basis and update, whatever trend lines they see fit. For most offices, I will say daily or weekly or sometimes even monthly isn't really feasible, because each pull, each update has to be done manually. So rather than just clicking a button or something happening automatically, somebody has to go through and run a series of codes, or do an extraction, and then actually upload it to an updated dashboard. So in an office like the Ninth Circuit, I think, so you focus first on getting up a dashboard that retrospectively, looks back in time and shows several years worth of data. And then you kind of use that experience to gauge what the appropriate updating time is. How hard was it for us to get these last 5-10 years of data up on this dashboard? Is this something that we think we can kind of make a more efficient process and get monthly, or is this something we need to do quarterly or even annually? So many of the PPIs, we advocate for being measured on a monthly basis, but some others don't really need to be updated nearly as often, like quarterly or annually would be fine. So if you can get to a point where you're doing monthly updates, I think you're doing extremely well in the greater scheme of things.
I think I'll put Catherine on the hot seat for just 1 second. The key to change is the first follower. You said that Monique had an all staff meeting of saying, here, this is, I'm the newly elected and here's what's going to be a priority. How did she create the environment that she got not only yourself, but it sounds like other sort of first followers, people willing to step up and say, yes, I will embrace this. I'm going to embrace change, right?
I mean, part of it is she has a large office. So if we can only get, a small percentage of them, it's still quite a few people. But no, I mean, when somebody presents it to you and they're enthusiastic about it and they, she's a compelling speaker. And so, we all bought into it because it sounds like a good idea. I mean, it was, we want to be accountable. We want to be transparent. We want people to know what we're doing. We want them to appreciate what we're doing. The general public has no idea what we're doing. Don't you want them to see what, the hard work that you all do every day? Everybody wants to feel appreciated. So, it's all in the presentation, and she definitely got a lot of us interested.
No, I can't help myself as we go back to Monique to get a kind of a final thought, but getting us back to excellence in prosecution. And I think you started out saying being proud of your work. I think with backlogs and recruiting, retention, all the awfulness and the COVID and the impacts on the courts and victims and police agencies, to get back like that we are working on safety and justice, and that it can be measured and you can show it. So Monique, I know you ran, you said this was one of the things you're going to do. Obviously you are a compelling speaker. Any final thoughts as for offices, not only to get involved in the PPI project, but in doing that to get into this working group, to get the buy-in, to get folks to roll up their sleeves? Because as I've always seen it, it's the planning, it's not necessarily the plan that gets that buy-in and will help facilitate change. So any final thoughts for the audience?
Sure. So, I think this is necessary. We talk a lot about the mistrust between community and law enforcement, the mistrust of the criminal legal system from minority communities. The way to address that is transparency. The way to be the most transparent that you can possibly be is to show what you're doing. I don't do math, that's why I went to law school, but I often hear my husband working with my kids on their math homework, and he always tells them, show your work, show your work, show your work, because if you make a mistake, I need to be able to see where you made the mistake so that we can go back and fix it. This is that. We have to show our work so that we are not dumbfounded by whatever the results are we are producing. We can go back and see where we went wrong and how we can fix it. And to Catherine's point, we can also show the great things that we're doing, how well we're supporting and representing the community, how many individuals that we're actually helping. I believe that this is the only way to do it. I believe that we are at a place where the public no longer just believes it because we said it. We need to show it. And I am so thankful for those on my team who have come forward and said, you know what, I agree, this is important, and I'm going to put in the work that's necessary to ensure that we can show our community that, we are doing what we say we are doing. So I encourage any office that wants to provide transparency to their community, that wants to rebuild trust between law enforcement and their communities, that wants to develop policies that will undo some of the things that we know are wrong with the criminal legal system, to do this, because I believe that it's going to help us to achieve those goals.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you to Monique, Catherine, and Rebecca for an excellent presentation. Your insights today have been extremely valuable for any office currently developing or managing and working on a working group, as well as determining how this crucial component of the PPI implementation can be cultivated to ultimate for success. And thanks again to our webinar audience in attendance. This webinar was recorded, and all previous APA webinar materials and recordings are available at no cost on our APA membership website. Individual offices and temporary memberships are available for the webinars. If you are a current APA member, you have automatic access to the webinar materials once they're available online. If you have any questions or concerns, please email us at webinars@apainc.org. Thank you for attending and have a great day.